there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to part 5 of our 6-part Shadows Over Innistrad full set review. So if you haven't seen the other parts, we do have a playlist on the channel, but we've already talked about all the white cards, all the blue, all the black, all the red. Today, we're looking at all of the green cards in this set. Tomorrow, we'll be back with part 6, which will include all the gold cards, the artifacts, and the lands. And the day after that, we'll have a pre-release primer. Hopefully get you ready for that pre-release Friday night or Saturday or Sunday, whichever one you're going to. So having said that, we have a lot to look at. So let's jump into the cards. First, we have Aim High. Good limited card. It's a nice combat trick for green. It might surprise your opponent and help you deal with a flying creature. I don't mind running 1 or 2 of these in my limited build. Autumnal Gloom, which transforms into Ancient of the Equinox. So this is actually pretty competitively costed for limited. I like the fact that I can throw this down for 3. I'm not usually a big fan of enchantments that cost 3 or more, but this one I think does enough. It's going to help me populate my graveyard if I'm in Golgari. And once I hit delirium, this thing transforms, and trample hexproof 4/4, that ain't too bad. So I'm okay playing this. Now again, I'm probably only playing this obviously if I'm playing Golgari, or if I'm just really confident that regardless of what color I'm playing secondly, I'm still going to be able to get delirium pretty quickly. But if I do include this in my deck and I can get this to transform maybe turn 4, turn 5, maybe throw some equipment on it, it can be a pretty good little beater. So it's not going to be for every limited deck, but a lot of them I think will be able to play something like this. Briar Bridge Patrol. I actually like this card a lot for Commander. I like the fact that you put this out and it's going to make your opponents think twice about attacking you as opposed to somebody else, because they don't want to give you kind of the extra value of the clue token. And as far as limited goes, I think this is a fine card for limited as well. 3/3 for 4 is serviceable, and then the fact that you're going to get at some point probably at least 1 investigate out of it makes it pretty good. Now that secondary ability feels like it really wants to be good, but it's asking a little bit from you. It's asking you to get 3 clue tokens, and it's asking you to sacrifice them. Now granted, in some formats there's probably more creative ways to sacrifice them, but at least for most part in limited and standard right now, you're probably paying 6 mana to do it, and at that point, what can't you really cast for 6 mana, I guess? So it becomes a little awkward. It feels like maybe someone will think of something to do with it, but I think for the most part, that will be maybe the part of the card that's not as important, believe it or not. So as far as limited goes, yes, play it there. I think this will be great in Commander. This could actually be a pretty interesting cube card too, especially if you have some investigate synergies with it, but I don't know if it's going to quite see standard play. Highway Carrier. This is just a nice little kind of value limited card. I mean, a 3/2 for 3 is good enough, and then on top of that, it has a little bit of upside. When it dies, you get to investigate. Clip Wings. I actually like this card a lot. It helps you at instant speed deal with certain flyers that you may not have another way of dealing with, and this is better than other edict type effects just because a lot of times your opponent only has 1 flyer. It's very common for control decks to just try to win the game with 1 hexproof flyer, like something like Sphinx of the Final Word or something like that. So this deals with that. As far as where you play this in limited, I think it's probably a sideboard card, because if my opponent's playing something like more aggressive ground pounders, maybe a black-red type build, this might not be quite as good, but I'm going to board it in when I need it. I think it's going to do some work for me. And same thing for standard. I think this could be boarded in against certain matchups in standard, especially if the control deck is using a card that is a hexproof flyer. And again, because this thing is so cheap, I could see it making its way into other formats as well. I could see this getting some sideboard play in Modern or even Legacy to deal with some of the reanimation effects that are out there. So, hey, watch this card. I think this could see a fair amount of play. Confront the Unknown. So this is kind of the investigate version of Giant Growth. It's, I don't know, asking for a little bit though. It's asking for you to have clue tokens, and there are going to be limited decks that are going to easily be able to produce clue tokens. There's cards like Tamio's Journal that are going to be fantastic with a card like this, but this isn't going to be for every limited deck. If you're very confident that you're going to be able to produce clue tokens at a consistent rate, then this becomes a very good card. You might want to run 1, even 2 of these in your deck. If you don't feel that way, then you're probably skipping this one. Crawling Sensation. So again, paying 3 for enchantment, not my favorite thing in the world. But again, I think this one does enough for me to be okay with it if I'm on the delirium plan. This does help you populate your graveyard, helps you get delirium, or maybe if you have a fair number of creatures that can be cast or have effects from the graveyard, this could be quite good. And the second part I do like, because now when I toss a land in my graveyard, I'm also getting a slight amount of value for it. I'm getting a 1/1 token. So, hey, at least I'm getting something from it. So I'm okay with this. Again, if I'm playing the limited strategy of trying to get my graveyard filled as fast as I possibly can, and I have a lot of delirium and that type of thing, I think that's really what this card's for. If I don't have that, in that case, then I might skip this one. Could this see standard play? I do think there is going to be a Golgari delirium style deck out there, and maybe even some other colors dabbling in delirium, possibly a Simic build or something like that. So I think it might see a little bit of play in standard, a little bit of fringe play. Again, what kind of pushes this card over the top is it does create tokens for you at times, so it's not just populating your graveyard and doing nothing else. Cryptolith Rite. This is really all about color fixing. If you're maybe splashing a 3rd color in limited, then you're gonna say, all right, let me run this. If you're on 2 colors, you're probably just gonna skip this. It's not really gonna do anything for you. I do wonder though if maybe in the next set or the next block we're gonna see some multicolor creatures, maybe a 5-color creature that's really good or something like that, because I feel like this card could really kind of push that type of strategy. So I don't know, keep an eye on this one. As far as other formats go, I think Commander, this could actually be pretty awesome. If you're in, say, some kind of 5-color, 4-color Commander deck, this would be really cool to help you push out, like maybe even your Commander if it's multiple colors, something like that. Also a good cube card if you want to kind of play around with those strategies. Cult of the Waxing Moon, another situational limited card. If I have a lot of werewolves, I'm going to run this and I'm probably going to be relatively happy with it. If I don't have a lot of werewolves, I might still run it because it's a 5/4 for 5, but I might also have better 5-drops as well. Deathcap Cultivator. Now, this is mana fixing, and it's mana dork, so I don't know if I'm quite used to seeing mana dorks costing 2 and being at rare yet. But that's kind of the world we live in, so it is what it is. Having said that, it's still a good card. It's going to fix your mana, and I do like the delirium effect of giving this thing Death Touch, because sometimes a Death Touch for 2 is still a good card, even if it didn't do the other ability. So in limited, yeah, this is going to be great. It's going to be even better, obviously, if you're in Golgari colors, but still going to be good for you. If nothing else, it ramps, and hopefully you'll be able to trade it for a bigger creature later in the game. And I do think you could see some standard play. Again, I do think Golgari will have a decent deck in the standard meta coming up. The Squatch Recruiter, which transforms into Cullen Horde Howler. Now, this is a werewolf I really like. Here's my thing with the werewolves. I mentioned this in the red video, but I don't think they're quite pushed enough to see like a standard tribal deck or anything like that. At least not yet. Maybe that will change with Eldritch Moon. But this card, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that it's a werewolf. It's actually doing a fair amount of work on its own. This thing is a grizzly bear with huge upside. So I'm getting a 2/2 for 2, but then I can go ahead and pay 3 to look at the top 3 cards in my library, find a creature card, hopefully, and put it in my hand. And at that point, once this thing transforms, and perhaps maybe this transforms on turn 3 just simply because I'm using the ability instead of playing another spell, now all of a sudden my creatures cost 1 less to cast, as long as my opponent can't cast 2 quick spells and try to flip it back. But even then it just becomes kind of a tug-of-war. You're still getting some value by using the ability on the front side, so you don't necessarily always have to be casting a spell to keep up with your opponent. So I find this actually very intriguing, very elegant design. This is a house in limited. I love it there. You're going to play a grizzly bear with this kind of upside and you're going to love it. I think it's good enough to see some standard play. I'm not quite sure which deck's looking for it, but I think it's just strong enough to get there. Equestrian Skill. I'm not a huge fan of this one. I mean, it's an aura for 4, and if the creature gets destroyed, you just kind of get 2 for 1, sort of wrecked with this card. And that on top of it, it gets a nice little bonus if it's a human, but you got to take into account most humans are maybe 1-2 power at most, right? So you're really not getting a whole lot from the trample. +3/+3 is good, and it might be great on certain creatures, but unless I have like a hexproof creature or something like that, I'm probably not running this. Fork in the Road. I like this a lot for, again, getting delirium, but what's nice about this card is it only costs 2, and it's not all about just getting delirium. It also helps you get a land, a basic land, out of your deck and put it in your hand. So it helps with making sure you hit your land traps consistently. It's going to help you with color fixing, and then on top of that, it also helps you with delirium. And even if you're not in the world of delirium, there's a fair amount of green cards that take lands from your graveyard and let you bring them back to your hand, so you might even just get value there. So this is going to be very good for you in limited, and I think it's good enough that it potentially could see some standard play in the right deck. Gluten Widow. Now this one's a reprint. It was originally printed in Shadow War, came back again in Avacyn Restored, and it's a good limited card. It's a 3/3 for 3, so very good stats there, and granted it can only block creatures with flying, but that's fine. You're going to be okay with that in most cases. This is a good thing to run in limited. Graph Mole. This is an interesting card. Now, sacrificing a clue, gaining 3 life, maybe not super exciting all the time, but this is a type of card that I would put in my sideboard in limited. I might not main deck this, but once I run up against that aggressive black-red deck, this thing is actually going to do a lot of work for me. It's going to help me get a blocker on turn 3 that's going to be able to deal with some of their threats, maybe even slow them down to the point where they have to stop attacking in. And then as the game goes on, as I get some clue counters and a little bit of card advantage, I might be able to gain my life back that I lost in the first couple turns. So I love this type of card as sideboard tech in limited. This is Groundskeeper. This is actually another reprint, originally from Arcadian Masks, reprinted again in 9th edition. Nice little 1-drop that does let you kind of smooth out your graveyard shenanigans a little bit. So if you have those cards that are just dumping cards into your graveyard and you have the need for a little bit of color fixing maybe, or just to get some lands back, this will do it for you. So you're not always going to need that, but it's a nice little stopgap, maybe a 1 of, or maybe even 2 of in certain decks that are being very aggressive trying to get delirium. Because of that, I could see it being a value card in limited, but also perhaps in standard in a delirium deck. Hermit of the Natternolls, which transforms into Lone Wolf of the Natternolls. This card I'm not as excited about. I mean, it's okay. The stats in limited are just fine, but you're not seeing, I don't know, as many instants played as you used to see, like counterspell type magic. A lot of the instants that you see today could also be played on your opponent's turn if that's what they needed to do. So this isn't going to be a card that's going to give you super value all the time. I'm probably boarding this in though if my opponent has a fair amount of instants. So for example, maybe they're playing blue-red, something like that, then yeah, I'm going to do it. But keep in mind, your opponent most of the time is going to have the ability to just play those on their own turn instead. It might slow them down a little bit, but it won't necessarily crush them. And the stats on this, as far as power and toughness, just aren't strong enough to really make me excited about the card. If the stats are pushed a little more, then I might be able to forgive the fact that the ability might not always trigger for me. But since the stats are what they are, I'm probably skipping this one more than I'm playing it. Hinterland Logger, which transforms into Timber Shredder. Not a whole lot to say about this one. It's a nice sort of grizzly bear, almost a grizzly bear with upside. It's a 2/1, but if you can flip it, 4/2 trample is okay. So you're not always going to want to run this, and the reason is there's a lot of great 2-drops in green, and we're going to see a lot as we go through the rest of the set review. So this is competing with a lot of really great cards. Now if you don't have those great cards, this is okay in limited, but there's a lot of really good ones we'll look at. I'll pack Resurgence. So this is nice because it's flash and it's a pretty cool combat trick as long as you're running a fair amount of wolves and werewolves. Now, like I said, I don't really think those are going to be a thing right now in standard, but if you're running those in limited, this is a good card to run along with it. And I think this will be cool in a commander deck that's revolving around werewolves, or if you have a werewolf piece in your cube, this can actually be a nice cube card. Inexorable Blob. I like this card. Now, it feels like, okay, 3 for 3/3. Okay, that's alright. And I have to get Delirium really to make this into a great card, but I think it's worth it. As far as limited goes, yeah, I'm going to play this and be very, very happy with it. Even if I don't have Delirium, it's good enough in limited that I'm okay with it for 3. I think this will see standard play, though. I think there's going to be decks out there that are really going to be focused on getting Delirium quickly, and those type of decks will be able to take advantage of this card. I think this works well with Collected Company. It's a target for that card that allows you to, at times, get extra value, even if it's not all the time. So I think this will see a fair amount of play. Intrepid Provisioner. This one, it's okay. The thing with it is you're getting a 3/3 for 4 now, which isn't super exciting, even though you get trample, and you get a little buff for 1 turn on 1 human. So, okay, that's fine if I'm playing with some humans. It's one of those cards in limited that if I have a fair amount of humans, maybe I'm in Selesnya, it has a little extra value. If I don't have anything better going on in the 4-drop, I'll play it, but this probably won't always make your cut. Kessig Dire Swine. This is okay in limited. I mean, 6 for 6/6 is maybe good enough. If you happen to get trample out of it, it becomes a little better. So I wouldn't mind running this at the 6th spot, assuming I don't have something really great that is better than this in the higher mana portion of my deck. But yeah, that's pretty much about it. Lambo Pacifist, which transforms into Lambo Butcher. Now, this card is a little slow and clunky if you play it on turn 2, so you probably don't want to think of this really as a 2-drop when you're creating your mana curve. Now, if you're thinking this more like a 3 or 4-drop, then you're going to get some value out of it, but if you're taking up the 2-drop space, there's actually probably better 2-drops that you could be putting in your deck. So it's not unplayable by any means. It's actually a pretty good card, but just think about it that way when you're building your limited deck. Lome Dryad. So it's mana fixing. This time it only costs 1, so I guess that's good. But I don't like the fact that it ties up basically itself and another creature, and if for some reason you can't get another creature, this thing really does nothing. So I don't know. You're gonna play it in limited if you're trying to splash a 3rd color and you need the fixing. That's what it's for. Other than that, you're gonna skip it. Might of Beyond Reason. Nice little combat trick. I mean, you get a couple +1/+1 counters. They're permanent. If you have Delirium, you get 3. That could actually be quite good on the right creatures if they have hexproof or something especially. But what I found is in limited, a lot of times I find myself not running these type of effects. They're not bad effects, but it's a 4-drop. I just kind of want a nice creature to put in the board sometimes. So I don't know. This card might make your cut at times, but it won't always. Muldriff Scavenger. Well, here's another grizzly bear with upside. This one I like a lot because when you do get Delirium, and if you have a deck that's really working towards it, even better, you got a nice little 3/4 for 2. Early in the game, it's a real good blocker, especially against aggressive decks. So some decks might not want to main deck this, but that's okay. You just bring it out of the sideboard if you're up against one of those aggressive, like red-black decks. This really can slow them down quite a bit. Moonlight Hunt. So this is very good instant speed removal as long as you are running a pretty good amount of wolves and werewolves. You don't want to be caught with this if you don't have those cards, but if you're running a good amount, you know what, this is going to be very good for you. One thing you do want to keep in mind though, this effect won't exile the creatures, so it is going to send things to the graveyard, which can be a little problematic if you're trying to deal with one of those creatures that can keep being recast from the graveyard, and there's a good amount of them in this set, especially in black, so it's not going to deal efficiently with those type of threats all the time. But let's face it, you're in green. Green doesn't have a whole lot of options for exile, so this is going to be just fine for you. Don't feel bad about playing this by any means. It's still removal, it's still great, but just be aware that you might run into some things that it becomes more of a tempo play than a removal spell sometimes. Obsessive Skinner. Now here's a really good 2-drop. Once you get Delirium, this thing just slowly starts to take over the game. Your opponent's just going to have to deal with it. And if you give this thing a couple counters, now it gets out of like fiery temper range. It just gets a little harder to deal with. I think it's a little too slow for like standard, but this could actually do a lot of work for you in limited. And I think it's a great 2-drop there. And this is kind of what I was alluding to earlier. There's a fair amount of really good 2-drops. Pack Guardian. This card gives you tons of value in limited. First off, it has flash. It's a 4/3 for 4, which is really fantastic. And if you can afford to discard a land, you also get a 2/2 wolf token out of the deal. On top of that, it's a wolf spirit, which synergizes really well with 2 of the main tribal types in the set, so you could get extra value out of this thing. I love this card in limited. I think it's spectacular. I don't really know if it's gonna see standard play quite yet, but if wolves and spirits get pushed a little more in the next set, this could be a contender in standard as well. There's just a lot of value to be had here, so I think someone's going to figure out how to take advantage of that at some point. Quilled Wolf. Here's another pretty good grizzly bear with upside. You get yourself a grizzly bear, and then later in the game when you need a mana sink, you can pump this, make it a 6/6. And it doesn't have evasion, so it's not the best card in the world, but hey, you gotta think, you only paid for 2 for this thing. So at 2, there's a good amount of value to be had here for limited. Rabid Bite. So this is sorcery speed, but it only costs 2, and read closely, it's not a fight mechanic. This is actually your creature gets to deal damage to another creature. End of story. So that's actually pretty good. Again, you might run into the issue we had when we talked about the previous removal card, that it's more of a tempo play against some of these cards that can come back from the graveyard. But at the same time, it doesn't matter. This thing's cheap. It's going to deal with a lot of important threats. Root Out. This is your naturalize for this set. You pay 1 more. It's at sorcery speed, but you get to investigate, so it is what it is. You need this when you have to deal with a problematic artifact or enchantment, and you're going to board it in at that time. That's basically it. Sage of Ancient Lore transforms into Werewolf of Ancient Hunger. So I think it's a little too clunky for like standard or something like that, and just the fact that the card is really counting on you to holding onto cards can sometimes be awkward, but I do like the fact that it replaces itself when you cast it, so I'm happy to play this in limited. I mean, it might not be a huge creature, but paying 5 for a little bit of board presence and it replaces itself, I'm probably okay with that. When it flips, you get a slightly bigger creature maybe. Now your opponent might try to dump their hand, obviously, when they see this hit the battlefield, but if they have 1 or 2 cards left, it gets a little bigger. Vigilance and Trample are okay. So this isn't something that you might always play in limited, but if you need a 5-drop, I think it's serviceable. I think where this card really shines is multiplayer formats like Commander. Now you'll have a number of players with cards in their hand. This card just becomes a lot better when it flips. Seasons Past. I actually kind of like this card. It's a mythic. It feels like maybe it's a little pricey. This could have been maybe a little more powerful at 5, but I still think it's going to do work for you. In limited, even if you're only getting back a couple of cards, 2, 3 with this, you're still getting a fair amount of value out of it. And like I said, there's going to be a lot of delirium strategies, so it might be easier to even get more value out of this type of card. This really shines in Commander, where you're going to have a wide range of casting costs, more so than probably a lot of other formats, so I could see it being very good there. I do think this could be standard playable in the right deck. Again, in standard, you're probably going to have a pretty good curve of mana working up towards your bigger creatures, so you could get some value later in the game off a card like this. So I don't know, keep an eye on it. It might see a little bit of play here and there. Second Harvest. This is a fun card for token play. Now it's a little awkward because there's not a whole lot of token generation in this set, and there's a little bit here and there. This kind of plays better almost like with the last set with Eldrazi tokens and stuff like that. So having said that, I think this is a really good Commander card. Imagine playing this with Doubling Season. That would be really awesome and probably a lot of fun. Maybe not for your opponents, but for you. I think that would be great. I don't know if there's really a place for this in standard. I mean, yeah, there are token strategies out there that you could employ, but I don't know if they're better than the other stuff you could be doing, quite honestly. But it's still an interesting card for some formats like Commander and Cube, and you got to watch a card like this for future releases, because if there's more token strategies coming in the future, this might get better. Next is silver for partisan, and I usually don't like playing 2/2s for 3, but there's enough upside here that I consider it depending on my limited build. So here's the thing. That effect is similar to heroic, but it doesn't work for enchantments and stuff, which is a little awkward. Instants and sorcery spells, however, it does work, so if you have a lot of combat tricks, then this becomes a little bit better. Now, here's the thing. This is a rare, so you're not going to probably get more than one of them in your limited pool. So I'm not really changing my deck build around this to put a lot of instants and sorceries in there to target this thing. But if I already have a fair amount of good combat tricks, and that's kind of the strategy I'm already employing, this becomes a lot better. So having said that, this isn't always going to make your cut in limited, but if you have the right pieces around it to make it better, then it's a decent 3-drop for sure. Solitary Hunter, which transforms into one of the pack. Not a lot to say about this card. It's just a serviceable limited card if the 4-drop. If you have better 4-drops, then you might not be running this. But if you don't, it's okay, and you won't be sad about it. Soul Swallower. So this is the intro deck card for the green intro deck, and this is actually pretty good. This is maybe one of the better intro deck cards I've ever seen, quite honestly. It costs 4 for a 3/3 with trample, but if you hit delirium, this thing kind of gets out of control pretty quick, and your opponent's going to have to deal with it. If they don't deal with it, they're basically losing the game. So because of that, it really kind of paints them into a corner. They need to find an answer. It's going to be fantastic for you in limited. This is a bomb. As far as standard goes, potentially could see a little bit of standard play too. Now granted, of course it dies to removal, but if your opponent doesn't have that answer at that moment, they might be in for some trouble. So I don't know, this may be a 1 or 2 of in a delirium style standard deck in Golgari. Stoic Builder. Here's another way to kind of smooth out the amount of lands going into your graveyard when you're kind of haphazardly dumping stuff in there. This is a good card in limited if you do have a strong delirium presence. If that's the case, then you might run one of these, maybe 2, because the stats aren't that bad on it, just to make sure that you're able to pull lands from your graveyard if you need extra value. Thornhide Wolves. Similar to the card a couple cards ago. You're not going to be sad to play this in limited if you need a 5-drop, but I'm not going to be excited either. So it's one of those cards not always making my cut, but if I need it, it's there. Tireless Tracker. So I like 3/2s for 3s in limited. Very happy to play this, and just the fact that whenever I play a land, I get a clue token, but maybe more importantly, I'm building this up, making it bigger. That's actually pretty good. So I like this card. It plays well with some of the cards that are helping you get extra lands back from your graveyard, stuff like that. Make sure you don't miss land drops. And there's also a lot of land shenanigans, of course, from the last block. So could this make a deck like a landfall deck better? Maybe good enough to make a bigger impact than standard, especially after everything else rotates out? I don't know, maybe. So this could see some standard play. I mean, keep an eye on it. I could see someone brewing around something like this. But other than that, definitely a good limited card. You'll be more than happy to play it. It's going to help you garner some card advantage mid to late game, and as you do, this thing gets even bigger. Next is Traverse the Ulvenwald. This is a very good card. Now, it's sorcery speed, but it only costs 1. Early game, it lets you make sure you don't miss your land drops. It's going to help you pull the color you need from your deck. Now granted, it's only getting you basic lands, but then later in the game, once you hit Delirium, this thing becomes a tutor for any land, not just basic land, or creature. So this is huge. It's a tutor for 1 that lets you get a creature or any land. This is big, and this is going to see tons of play. So yes, it's good for you in limited. I don't think I need to say much more about that. It's going to be very good for you in standard. There's going to be decks that are going to be able to get Delirium, I think, relatively quickly, especially the Golgari decks or maybe some Simic decks. This is definitely playable in modern. Tutors are just very, very powerful. And the fact that it's a 1-drop tutor, it's going to be playable in Legacy as well. This is going to be everywhere. Commander, it's a good card. Cube, it's a good card. Could possibly see Vintage play. I don't know if Vintage needs this because Vintage has other things and fast ways to cast them. But it's still a very, very good card. Now, get your foils of this one. It's going to see tons of play. It's a rare. Keep an eye on it. This is fantastic. Ulvenwald Hydra. Now, here's a mythic that I'm just not excited about. This one kind of hurts me a little bit. It costs 6. I mean, I do like the fact when you play it, you get to search for a land. Not basic land, but a land. Put it in the battlefield tab. That's kind of nice. Most of the time I play this thing, it's probably at least going to be a 7/7, right? In most cases. As long as I'm not ramping with something that's giving me multiple mana. But here's where it just falls flat for me. It has reach and not trample. This really needed trample. Like, this is like a 7/7 huge Hydra. It should be attacking in, right? This should be an offensive card. This shouldn't be sitting back and blocking a 2/2 flyer. This should be attacking, and I just feel like it's just going to get chump blocked, and then I'm going to just get annihilated by flyers. I don't know. I'm just not happy with this, and I feel like this card maybe started off with trample and they thought it was too powerful and they switched it to reach. I don't know. It just doesn't feel mythic to me. It just doesn't feel very good. Having said that, I mean, yeah, it's still a big creature for 6. You'll play it in limited and you'll smile and you'll get through it. But other than that, I just really don't see this getting any other play. And it's just kind of sad again because it's a mythic. And I don't know. It just simply could have been pushed by one small change and it could have been a good card, but anyway, is what it is. Ulvenwald Mysteries. I'm not super excited about this one. I'm paying 3 for this and then I'm still not really getting anything out of it. Now I have to wait for one of my creatures to die, then I get an investigate token, then I have to pay 2 more mana to sacrifice that token to get a card draw and a 1/1 human soldier. It's just too contingent on everything just going exactly the right way, so I'm probably skipping this one. Vessel of Nescency. Another really good cheap green card. Now this one I really like. I'm paying a green and then 2 to activate it. I get to reveal the top 4 cards and then put an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker into my hand. But more importantly, maybe the rest go into my graveyard. And that's going to be a big deal, obviously, in this set. It's cheap. It does everything you want it to do. It helps you get a little card selection, helps populate your graveyard, and you'll be very happy to play this in limited. This is going to see standard play, no doubt. It's cheap enough, again, to see modern play in decks that are looking to do something like this. So keep an eye on this card. It's another one I'd like to try to pick up foils of. It's a common card, but I think it's going to see a lot of play. Veteran Cathar. This is actually another good grizzly bear with upside. I like this a lot in limited. You get yourself a 2/2 for 2, and then if you're in Selesnya playing some humans, and that's definitely a good archetype that you could draft, this card really kind of gives you a lot of value in that situation. I like the fact that it costs 4 for the double strike. I feel like they could have made this cost 5, so I'm happy it's only 4. Yeah, this is very, very good, and just another really pushed grizzly bear, I guess. I think this could see some standard play as well. If that Selesnya beatdown deck has enough humans in it for it to matter, then this could be a part of that deck as well, so keep an eye on it. Watcher in the Web. I think this is a good limited card, especially if you're going up against the aggressive deck. So maybe you sideboard it in, maybe it's not in your main deck, but you'll be very happy to have this when you are up against someone that's just putting down creature after creature after creature. It's going to let you deal with some of that threat, and maybe it's a tempo play, but it might buy you a little time. Weirding Wood. This is the last card of the day, and this is a good one. I'm going to enchant my land. It's going to help me with color fixing, gives me a little bit of ramp, and it also investigates. It does a lot for 3 mana, so I'm very happy to play this in limited, especially if I'm playing maybe a 3rd color, but even if I'm not, this is still actually pretty decent. And I do think we'll see some standard play just because of that as well. So having said that, hey, we made it. Those were all the green cards. So we'll be back tomorrow. We're going to look at all the gold cards, the artifacts, and the lands. That will wrap up the set review, but we'll be back the next day to talk about the actual pre-release. We'll talk about things like archetypes and what to look at when you open your card pool and what the mechanics are and all that stuff. So, hey, as always, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day.
Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video, like all my videos, was made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Even a donation of $1 helps me to keep growing this community and creating better quality videos for all of you. Check out our Patreon page for exclusive giveaways and future goals for the channel. If you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the MTG news, spoilers, set reviews, product openings, or finance videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a good day.